He bought a cheap ranch at auction, but came with a gorgeous wife.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The road leading west out of Bridger Post was all dust and silence. No signs, no mile markers. Just brittle mesquite, dry fence posts, and the same hard brown earth stretching for miles. The sun had dropped lower now, throwing a dull gold light across the land. Cade Mercer rode with his head down, the collar of his coat turned against the wind. His gelding, a thick-chested bay with tired eyes, moved slow but steady. Neither man nor beast was in a hurry. Cade hadn't spoken a word since leaving town. He didn't need to. Everything that needed saying was printed on the folded deed in his saddlebag. 42 acres of dry scrubland, one broken-down ranch house, a barn half falling in on itself, and a fence line the auction clerk had described as mostly suggestion. He'd paid less than what most folks spend on cattle feed in a good year. The price hadn't made sense, but Cade hadn't asked questions. He didn't have the appetite for small talk, and the folks in town didn't have the spine to warn him even if they'd wanted to. Cade Mercer was 33, tall, broad-backed, and carried the kind of silence that made men leave space when he passed. His face was lean and lined from sun, not age, with a roughness that came from years of bad sleep and worse memories. He had worked cattle, fought in skirmishes along the frontier, and spent time with men whose names he didn't want to remember. One brother lost to fever. One friend shot in the back in New Mexico. He didn't speak of those years, not even in his own head. What mattered was now. A piece of land, a roof to fix, and maybe some rest if he earned it. He crested the last rise, just before sundown. The ranch sat low in a shallow dip between two dry ridges. The fence around the front paddock sagged, like it had given up. A warped gate leaned open. The house. One-story, wood slab walls with a stovepipe that barely held vertical. Had paint clinging to it in spots, but not enough to count. The porch roof had collapsed on one side. A wheelbarrow lay on its side, near the steps, rusted to the axle. The barn sat further back, half in shadow, its big front doors open a crack. He reined in, didn't move, didn't speak. He scanned the property with a soldier's eye, checking windows, watching for movement. It wasn't just habit, it was instinct. Quiet places didn't always mean empty places. He dismounted, stiffly. His left knee ached the way it always did after a long ride. He looped the reins around the porch post, then pulled a small roll of documents from his coat. The deed was still there, still signed, still his. The house could wait. He wanted to check the barn. The air changed the moment he stepped inside. Cooler. Still. It smelled of hay, sweat, and something else, soap? Skin? He stood still. Then he heard her. The softest shift of weight on wood. A breath drawn and held. Not animal. He moved forward slowly, boots quiet in the dirt, until he saw her. She was crouched near a low wooden crate in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of hay bales. Her back was to him. A quilt wrapped around her shoulders had slipped, revealing the faded muslin dress underneath. Her legs were bare from the knee down. Her feet were dirty. She didn't move. "Stand up," he said. Not loud, just firm. She did. Madeline. He didn't know her name yet, but that was it. 26. White. Auburn hair, tangled over her shoulders, falling down her back in waves. Her face turned toward him slowly. Gray eyes, sharp and guarded. No panic. No begging. Just readiness. Her dress was too thin for autumn, frayed along the seams. A tear near the neckline, revealing more than most men would ignore. The fabric clung to the curve of her chest in a way that left no question of her shape. Another tear along the side opened just enough to show part of her upper thigh when she shifted weight. But she didn't cover herself. She didn't explain. She just looked him in the eye. "I figured someone would come," she said, voice low, raw from disuse. Didn't expect it'd be today. He narrowed his eyes. "You live here?" "Been in the barn since June. Since my husband got trampled." She glanced at the hay. Didn't have rights to the house. No money to go. Just stayed where no one cared. Her face remained steady. No tremble in the voice. No dramatics. Just facts. Kate studied her. She wasn't gaunt, but she wasn't soft either. She looked like someone who'd fought to stay alive, hauling water, bartering for scraps, doing whatever she could without begging. "You got a name?" he asked. "Madeline." He nodded. "No one mentioned you." She gave the faintest smile, empty, not bitter. "They wouldn't." "I bought this land," he said. "I know. I didn't buy you. I know that too." She shifted, not toward him, but more upright, like she was preparing to be ordered off. "I'll go if you want me gone," she added. "But I ain't got nowhere. And I ain't a skin for pity." Silence followed. He could hear a hawk screech out toward the ridge, the soft clatter of the barn roof where the wind caught it. Cade stared at her a long while. He thought about the empty house. He thought about the cold nights ahead. He thought about how she hadn't once tried to plead. "Can you cook?" he asked. She blinked. "Yes. There's beans in the pack. Start a fire." She nodded. No hesitation. No relief. Just motion. She moved past him, calm and steady, stepping barefoot out across the yard. He watched her go. Every instinct told him this was trouble he didn't ask for. He'd bought this ranch to be alone, to leave behind years of loss, men who died with his name in their mouths, and the echo of things he couldn't fix. But something about the way she stood, quiet, raw, still proud. He couldn't send her away. He didn't have it in him. Not this time. The house creaked when she entered, the front door brushing against the warped floorboard before settling shut behind her. Madeline moved straight toward the hearth without speaking, her body stiff with the kind of fatigue that didn't just come from work but from holding yourself together too long. Kate stood in the doorway, watching from behind as she moved through the space like she'd been there before. Not as an owner, but as someone who had once tried to stay invisible in a place she no longer had a right to. She found the old cast iron pot on a lower shelf near the stove, ran a hand over it to check for dust and rat droppings. It was clean enough. She looked back at him once, quick, uncertain. "I'll need water," she said. "Pump's out back." "I know." She stepped past him again without waiting for approval. Kate followed her with his eyes, but didn't speak. His coat stayed on. His hat, too. He hadn't settled in yet, hadn't decided what this place was to him. The ranch was supposed to be a project, quiet, isolated, far from the kinds of people who made demands or asked about his past. He didn't expect someone to already be living in the dust of it, and he sure as hell didn't expect her. He looked around the inside of the cabin as she worked outside. One table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with no mattress, an empty shelf nailed crooked above the stove. The windows were intact, barely. The air inside was stale, holding a faint sour scent that came from months without fire or food. He checked the corner pantry. Empty. Not even weevils. A few minutes later, she came back in, panting slightly from carrying the bucket with both hands. She poured the water into the pot and crouched down to strike a match. Her dress tugged tighter across her chest as she leaned forward, the thin muslin catching at her breasts and shoulders. The neckline hung low, worn from age, exposing soft skin flush from the cool air outside. She didn't pull it up. She didn't act ashamed. Cade turned away and busied himself unstrapping the saddlebag near the hearth. He handed over a small sack of dry beans and salt, nothing more. "It's not much," he said. "I've lived on less." She didn't say it with pity, just fact. She stirred in silence, waiting for the water to boil. The fire crackled slowly, giving the room the first warmth it had felt in months. After a few minutes, she broke the quiet. "You from here?" "No, don't seem like it. I passed through once. Years ago." She nodded. That was enough. He leaned back against the far wall, folding his arms. "You said your husband died in June." She didn't answer right away. Her jaw worked as she stirred the beans. Horse kicked. He fell wrong. Neck snapped clean. "Town didn't help you?" "They helped him into the ground." That was about it. Her voice didn't rise. "No kin. No claim to the house. So I stayed out of sight. Figured if I kept to the barn, no one come looking. I was right. Why didn't you go to the church house?" She shrugged. "Tried. Pastor said the Lord helps those who help themselves." Her lips tightened. Didn't say nothing about women with no last name and no coin. Kate stayed quiet. He understood that kind of rejection. The beans were boiling now, the steam rising slow and thin. The scent of salt water and starch filled the room. She ladled 2 bowls and handed him one, holding it with both hands. He took it. Their fingers brushed. Not deliberate. Just contact. They sat at the table, chewing slowly, neither saying much. The food was bland, but it was hot. That was enough. He watched her over the rim of his bowl. The bruising on her upper arm looked older now that the firelight touched it. Her hands were calloused at the edges. She was no stranger to labor. He wondered how much she'd gone without to survive here, sleeping in a barn like an animal. He wondered if anyone had spoken to her kindly since spring. She caught him watching, but didn't flinch. "You thinking of tossing me out still?" she asked softly. "No. You sure? You work. You don't take. That's enough." She looked at him for a long beat. Not like a woman weighing her safety, but like someone trying to figure out if this man was the kind who'd change his mind when the weather turned. He didn't look away. "You got family?" she asked. "Not anymore." "War." "Part of it." She nodded again. That explained enough. They finished their meal in silence. After, she stood to gather the bowls, rinsing them with a little water left in the bucket. She didn't ask where to sleep. She just started for the door, quilt folded over her arm. He didn't stop her, but as she reached for the handle, he said, "You can take the bed tonight. I'll sleep on the floor." She paused, turning slightly. "I've been in the barn months now. Floor don't bother me. It's cold. So am I. I'm out of skin." She studied him. He didn't blink. Finally, she walked over to the bed and laid the quilt across it. Sat on the edge. Her shoulders sank slightly, not from defeat, but from something else, caution beginning to let go. Not trust. Not yet. But rest. The first she'd been allowed in too long. He lay down, near the fire on the wood floor, coat still on. Watched the ceiling while the wind moved outside like dry breath. They didn't speak again that night. But for the first time in months, neither of them slept completely alone. Morning came slow and cold. A faint gray light slipped in through the warped gaps in the cabin walls, touching Cade's face and dragging him out of a sleep that had been light at best. His back ached from the floor, and his hip had gone numb sometime during the night. He didn't complain. He never had. He just sat up stiffly, pushed himself to his feet, and crossed to the hearth where the fire had turned to ash. It was quiet. Still. He glanced over. Madeline was still in the bed, the quilt pulled up high, her face turned toward the wall. Her auburn hair spilled across the pillow in loose waves. One shoulder was exposed. Her dress had slipped down slightly in sleep, revealing the soft curve of skin above her chest. The firelight from a night before had cast her in silhouette, but daylight made things plainer, more vulnerable. She didn't stir. Kate didn't look too long, just enough to see she was breathing easy. He stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The wind was sharp, and the morning air carried that hard chill that meant winter was on its way. He pumped water into a bucket, the metal groaning with each stroke, then carried it in and set it by the door. He didn't wake her, just let her rest. By the time she stepped out from the bedroom, barefoot, hair pulled into a loose braid, her dress still wrinkled and slightly torn, Kate had a fire going and coffee on the boil. She looked at him once, then moved past him without speaking, reaching for the wash basin near the door. She washed her face quietly, bracing herself with one hand against the wall, the other dipping the rag and wiping slow, patient strokes over her cheeks, neck, and collarbone. He didn't turn away. She knew he saw, but she never rushed or covered herself. There was a calm, practiced steadiness to her. She'd learned, somewhere along the line, that shame didn't feed you or keep you warm. Over breakfast, just coffee and a dry piece of bread each, they spoke in pieces. "You got tools?" she asked. "In the barn. Most of them rusted out. I can fix the windows today," she said. "That back one's loose in the frame. You know how. I've had to learn." Kate nodded. That was enough. As she stepped outside, he watched her walk the yard, her steps careful on the dry grass, arms folded against the wind. Her dress clung to her hips in the back, the tear near the hem still exposing the lower part of her thigh as she moved. It wasn't deliberate. It just was. Cade forced himself to look away. He saddled the gelding and rode the edge of the property, checking fence lines. Several posts had collapsed completely. Others leaned to one side. It'd take days to set them all straight, and that was without rain, without snow. He worked steady, muscles pulling from old scars and an aching knee, but the rhythm kept him focused. Manual work was better than thinking. When he came back just before midday, he found Madeline on a short ladder by the side of the house, fitting a plank over the frame of the rear window. Her hair was tied back with a scrap of fabric, and her arms were smudged with dust. The dress had ridden up slightly again when she reached, the neckline pulled low enough that the round shape of her breasts shifted with each motion. She didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. "You're gonna fall if you lean like that," he said. She looked down at him. "Then catch me." He blinked. A small smirk crossed her lips, barely, but it was the first flicker of humor he'd seen from her. "You always fix your own windows?" he asked, stepping closer. "Didn't have a man to do it before. Don't expect one now. I ain't looking to be anybody's man. I ain't asking." That ended the conversation, but something hung in the space between them. Not tension exactly, but recognition. The kind of mutual understanding that didn't need explaining. By nightfall, the wind had picked up. The fire burned stronger, and Madeline cooked a thicker stew from the dried beans and a few wild onions she'd found growing near the south fence line. They ate at the table again, still not talking much, just chewing, listening to the wind. Cade's gaze drifted toward her again. The bruise on her arm was almost gone, but new red marks lined the tops of her bare feet. She hadn't asked for boots. She hadn't asked for anything. "You still sleeping in that barn before I showed up?" he asked. "Every night. No trouble from animals? Some raccoons. One snake. You scared?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I was angry. Not scared." He stared at her across the table. "Why angry?" "Because he left me with nothing. Because folks saw me as less than a stray. And because I let it happen. I stayed quiet too long." Her voice didn't waver. If anything, it was calmer now. More solid. "You didn't have a say," Cade muttered. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I've still got a choice now." He nodded once. Respect. Plain and simple. When they finished eating, she washed the bowls, and he added wood to the fire. The cabin felt warmer now, not just from heat, but from routine, from use, from two people moving around each other without stepping on anything. She stood by the bedroom doorway again, holding the quilt. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I'll take the floor tonight." "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." He didn't argue. He set a pillow by the hearth and laid the second quilt on the floor. She took her place in the corner near the fire. He watched as she lowered herself slowly, stretching out on her side. The loose neckline of her dress shifted again as she adjusted, the curve of her chest settling in full view before she tugged the blanket partway up. Not modest, just cold. She looked at him then. No words, no expectations. He sat near the fire, back against the wall. They stayed like that a long while, both staring into the flames. And without meaning to, Cade found himself wondering something he hadn't dared think in years. If maybe this place, maybe she wasn't a burden after all. Just maybe it was the first part of something worth keeping. Cade was already outside when Madeline stirred. The light bleeding in through the cabin windows was soft and gray, the kind that barely colored the frost on the tall grass outside. The air was colder than the night before, biting at exposed skin, but it wasn't the kind of cold that stopped work. It was the kind that pressed a person to move, slow at first, then steady. She sat up from her place on the floor near the hearth, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her body ached, the good kind of ache that came from having done something useful the day before. The fire was low. She added a few sticks, coaxed the embers, and waited for it to rise again. There was a second quilt folded neatly over the edge of the bed. She hadn't touched it the night before, even though he'd left it for her. Outside, the sound of a hatchet splitting wood cracked once, then again, followed by silence. She moved to the basin, washed up quickly, tied her hair back tighter, and stepped outside barefoot. Cade stood near the edge of the cabin, a stack of logs forming beside him, his coat unbuttoned at the chest, shirt damp with sweat at the collar. He was mid-swing, the hatchet sharp and clean in motion. His arms flexed, his shoulders squared with each blow. He paused when he saw her, but didn't speak, just handed her one of the split logs. She took it without question, carried it toward the wood pile, and came back for another. They worked like that for half an hour. No orders, No small talk, just motion. When the stack was full, he finally broke the silence. You're gonna ruin your feet out here without boots. She glanced down, her toes red with cold and dirt. They've held up so far. That's not the point. You got boots to spare? No, but I'll get you some. You planning a trip to town? He hesitated. Maybe. Later. She folded her arms. What is it you think I'm doing here, Cade? He looked at her hard. You mean besides fixing my windows and sleeping on the floor? You think I'm waiting for you to give me something? I don't know what you're waiting for. Madeline nodded, jaw clenched. She stepped back toward the cabin. He didn't follow. Later, after she'd made breakfast and left a bowl for him on the table without comment, she slipped into the barn. The loft where she used to sleep was still there. Her things were still tucked in the corner, packed into a small cloth sack she hadn't touched since moving inside. She stared at it for a long time. Part of her still didn't trust the roof overhead or the man who'd let her sleep beneath it. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because men always changed. She'd seen it. Her husband had been charming once too. Had called her beautiful, strong, said things like, "I'll never let you go hungry." Then the cattle died off, and the bottle took his place, and the words turned to slaps and silence. She wasn't sure what Cade Mercer was yet, but so far, he hadn't asked anything of her. That scared her more than the alternative. Men who wanted nothing were harder to predict. That afternoon, Cade saddled the gelding and rode out without saying where he was going. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. He returned before sundown with a bundle in one hand, old, second-hand boots tied together with string. He handed them to her at the gate. "They're too big," she said after slipping one on. "They're all they had. I'll stuff them with rags." He gave a short nod. "They'll keep you from freezing. I didn't ask for him." "I know." She held his gaze longer than she had before. That night, she cooked again. More stew, thicker this time with bits of meat he'd brought back. The smell filled the cabin in a way that made it feel more like a home and less like a stopover. She set the bowl in front of him at the table and sat across from him without a word. Midway through eating, she leaned back and spoke quietly. "You lost someone." He looked up. "You don't talk about it, but I can see it." He didn't answer. She didn't press, just waited. Finally, he said, "Brother." He was younger. Got sick. Wasn't much I could do. When? 5 years ago. She nodded. "That's why you live like this." "I don't live like anything. I just stay out of the way." She stirred her stew. "That's not living." He frowned. "What do you call what you're doing?" She smiled, tired. "Surviving." The room quieted again. When the dishes were clean and the fire burned low, she stood by the bedroom door. This time, she didn't pick up the quilt, didn't walk to the hearth. "I'll sleep in the bed tonight," she said. He looked up. "All right." She watched him closely. "You don't need to stay on the floor." "I know. I'm not asking for anything." "I didn't think you were." She hesitated, then turned, stepped into the bedroom, and closed the door softly behind her. He remained by the hearth for a while longer, staring into the flames. His hands were still rough with the day's work, his back sore, but there was a pull in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't lust. It wasn't comfort. It was a quiet need for something to hold on to that didn't die or walk away. He put out the lamp, stripped off his shirt, and lay down on the floor again without a word. In the other room, Madeline lay on her side, eyes open in the dark. And for the first time, she found herself wondering what it might feel like not just to survive, but to stay. The morning came quieter than usual, the kind of still where even the birds held off their songs. Cade woke slowly, eyes blinking open to the weak gray light spilling through the window slats. His back ached again from sleeping on the floor, but he didn't move right away. He lay there listening. He didn't hear her in the kitchen. No clinking of the pot, no soft bare footsteps. The fire had burned down to cold ash. He sat up, pushed himself to his feet, and stepped toward the bedroom door, pausing just before he knocked. It was open. Madeline wasn't inside. His jaw tensed. Not fear, just that tightness that came from not knowing what the hell was happening. He stepped outside quickly, scanning the yard. She was at the pump, fully dressed, hair tied back. The new boots, too big and stuffed with rags, were on her feet. She was working the handle slowly, like she had been for a while. He walked over, stopped a few feet away. You all right?" She didn't look at him at first, just nodded. Didn't sleep. He waited. Finally, she said, "It's not your fault." "What isn't?" "That I still feel like a guest here. Like someone who might get asked to leave in the morning." Cade's brows pulled together. "I never said you were temporary." "I know," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean it's not in the air." He looked at her carefully. "You think I'm just keeping you here out of pity? I think I don't know why I'm still here. And I'm scared to ask." Cade stepped forward, his voice low. "I'm not the kind who makes promises. And I don't talk about things that ain't solid. But you've earned more than a place in a barn. You stayed when you didn't have to. You worked. You made this place livable. I didn't do that." She finally looked at him. Her gray eyes were sharp, tired, and unsure. "I ain't looking for pity, Cade. I need to feel like I'm worth something. Not just to you, but in general. I ain't felt that in a long time." His chest tightened. He wanted to say more. He couldn't find the words. He stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough that the distance between them felt smaller than it had been in days. "You're worth more than you think," he said, "even if you don't see it yet." She didn't cry, but something in her face cracked a little. The corner of her mouth twitched like she might speak, then didn't. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the house. Later that day, they worked the south fence together. Cade carried the replacement posts. Madeline followed with the wire spool and hammer. They didn't speak much, but the rhythm returned, the steady give and take of movement, the quiet teamwork that had somehow become natural. She bent to hold the posts in place while he set them. Her dress caught on the wood once, pulling higher up her leg. He saw the curve of her thigh, the soft inside of her knee. He looked away quickly, jaw tense, breathing slow. She noticed. By early afternoon, they sat under the one tree on the property that still held leaves, sharing bread and jerky. The silence was not cold now. It was worn in, lived in. She pulled her knees up, adjusting the dress around her legs. Her hands rested in her lap. "I used to dream of leaving this place," she said, "when I was younger. Figured I'd see St. Louis. Maybe Kansas City. Someplace with brick streets and lamps that didn't flicker." "You could still go," Cade said. "I don't want to now." He looked at her. She didn't meet his eyes. "I used to think a man would come and change everything," she said. "Sweep in, fix the roof, buy me boots, say all the things I wanted to hear." I didn't say much. "No," she replied, finally looking at him. "But you stayed." That night, something shifted. They didn't speak after supper. She cleaned the dishes quietly. He stoked the fire. She changed in the bedroom and came out wearing her nightgown again, the thin one, the only one she had. It hung loose around her frame, slipping slightly off one shoulder. Her cleavage showed plainly through the low front, the swell of her breasts outlined by firelight, the curve of her hip visible through the side slit when she moved. She didn't hide. He didn't stare, but he saw. She walked slowly toward him, stopping near where he stood by the hearth. "Would you come sit beside me?" she asked. He paused, then nodded once. They sat together on the rug, side by side, their shoulders not quite touching. She pulled the quilt around her legs. He stayed quiet. "I don't want to be afraid of this place anymore," she said. "Of you. Of waking up alone again. I ain't going anywhere." She turned to look at him, and when she did, her hand moved, small, cautious, and rested against his. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't a test. It was an invitation. Cade looked down at her hand against his, rough fingers meeting softer skin. He turned his palm and held her properly. She breathed in. He looked at her again, more directly this time. Her face was tired but soft now. Her lips slightly parted. Her chest rising slow under the gown. He leaned in and kissed her. No rush. No hunger. Just steady pressure, his hand cupping the side of her neck, thumb brushing her jaw. She let him. When it broke, she didn't speak. She leaned her forehead to his shoulder and stayed there. They said nothing more that night, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Cade woke to the soft shift of weight beside him. He opened his eyes slowly, not startled, just aware. The fire was still glowing low across the cabin floor, casting long, gentle shadows up the log walls. The warmth of the night still lingered between the blankets, and she was there, curled on her side beneath the quilt, her breath even, her bare arm resting lightly against his chest. They hadn't spoken after the kiss. They hadn't needed to. She'd leaned into him after, resting her head beneath his chin, and when the fire burned down, he'd stood and reached for her hand. She followed him into the bedroom. Quiet, barefoot, willing, not desperate, just sure. They'd undressed slowly. She had moved first, slipping the nightgown off her shoulders with trembling fingers. Her full figure was revealed piece by piece, her soft stomach, her curving hips, the swell of her breasts. Cade didn't rush. He took her in with reverence, not hunger. And when his hands met her skin, she didn't flinch. Just exhaled. What passed between them wasn't wild or fast. It was slow, steady quiet, as if every movement was a promise not to harm, not to leave. He touched her like she was something to be cared for. She reached for him like she'd been waiting to be held right. And for a while, minutes that stretched and didn't need counting. They weren't a broken man and a widowed woman on the edge of nowhere. They were simply two people who had found each other, without plan, without noise. Now, in the pale hush of morning, Cade watched her sleep for a moment. Her hair was loose, spilling over the pillow in waves. The quilt had slipped down her back, exposing the line of her shoulder, the soft rise of her breast. He reached out and gently pulled the blanket higher, then stood and dressed quietly. He didn't want to disturb the peace. Outside, the frost still clung to the fence posts. The ground crunched under his boots as he crossed the yard to feed the horse. He worked in silence, but his thoughts weren't quiet. This wasn't how he imagined things going. Not when he bought the land. Not when he first saw her barefoot in the barn. He had come here to be alone, to escape memory, to live without attachments because attachments always got ripped away. But now she was in the house, his house, in his bed, in his thoughts, and it didn't feel like a mistake. When he came back inside, she was up, dressed again in her cream muslin dress, hair tied back, standing barefoot near the stove. "I was going to get the fire going," she said softly. "I did already," he replied. She turned toward him. Her eyes weren't unsure anymore, still guarded but not hiding. "I can mend the tear in the fence this morning," she said. "And that corner shutter's been banging again. You don't have to do all that today." "I want to." He nodded, pulled off his coat, and hung it on the hook near the door. As she worked by the table, he came up behind her and laid a hand gently at her waist. She stiffened for half a second, then relaxed. "You warm enough last night?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I haven't been that warm in months." He leaned down, pressed his lips just once to her shoulder, then stepped back. "I'll go into town tomorrow," he said. "Get us more supplies." She hesitated. "You trust me here alone?" "Yeah," he said without pause. "Not scared I'll run off?" "I'd know if you were going to." She looked at him, her gray eyes serious. "I'm not." He nodded once. "I know." Later that day, they worked together in silence again, but it was different now. She brushed his arm when passing. He helped her steady the ladder when she reached the shutter. When her dress caught and pulled higher, he looked, but not with hunger, with something quieter, like memorizing. That evening, as she sat brushing out her hair near the fire, he watched her from the table. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Still." She shook her head. "Not anymore." "Why?" She turned to face him, setting the brush down in her lap. "Because leaving means you never stay long enough to see what something becomes." He nodded slowly. "And I want to see what this becomes." He stood, walked to her, and reached for her hand. "No promises," he said. "No need," she replied. They stood there together, firelight on their faces, their silence not empty, but full of quiet understanding. She didn't need rescuing anymore, and he no longer needed to be alone. They weren't just surviving. They were choosing to stay. The morning sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that hung low and gray, smothering the sun without spilling rain. The light it cast over the ranch was flat, cold, and colorless. But inside the cabin, there was warmth, with smoke, the soft scent of cornbread baking, and the familiar quiet of two people moving in step. Cade sat at the table, oiling the rifle he'd unpacked weeks ago but hadn't touched since. His motions were calm, not urgent, more habit than necessity. He didn't expect trouble, not out here, but something had been gnawing at him for days. He watched Madeline as she worked by the stove. She wore the same faded dress, now patched along the hem. The new boots sat by the door, drying from the day before. Her hair was pulled up, cheeks pink from heat and exertion, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She looked at home, more at home than either of them had any right to feel, given how it all began. He finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Anyone ever come looking for you?" She glanced over her shoulder. "You mean since he died?" "Yeah." "No, I don't think anybody much cared. He didn't leave debts, just silence. His people never wrote. Mine, I didn't have any left." "You sure?" She set down the pan and turned fully toward him. "If someone was coming, they'd have come months ago." He nodded, but something in his gut stayed tight. Later, he rode into town. Just a short trip, supplies, nails, salt, flour, coffee. He left her behind again, the second time now, and trusted she'd be there when he returned. And she was. By the time he made it back, the yard was swept, the porch cleared of leaves, and the broken shutter finally nailed back straight. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the stranger near the gate. A man, lean, with a cheap brown coat, boots too polished for someone who belonged out here. He stood next to a mule hitched at the fence line, talking to her. Cade slowed the horse. His eyes didn't leave the man. He rode straight in, silent, dismounted without a word. Madeline saw him first. Her stance was guarded, not scared. Her arms were crossed, shoulders stiff. "Everything all right?" Cade asked, his voice calm but clipped. The man turned. Didn't mean to cause trouble. Just to skin questions. "What kind?" The man gave a dry smile. "I work freight out of Bastrop. Sometimes take mail up through the North Ridge. Saw a post hung up back in town, old one, about a woman missing from this county. Fella said his brother's widow up and vanished. Said she was probably dead, but if not, maybe taken in by someone." The man gave Madeline a once-over. "I saw her. Figured I'd ask." "She's not missing," Cade said. "She's here. That's all." The man raised his hands. "Didn't mean offense. Just a message, not judgment. You deliver it. Messages received. That's the end of it." The man looked at Madeline again, then back at Cade. Something unsaid passed between them, more weight than the words carried. Then the man turned, climbed on his mule, and rode off. Cade didn't speak for a long time after. Just watched the horizon where the rider disappeared. Then turned toward her. "You knew that was coming? I figure maybe someday. You worried he'll come?" She nodded. "Not because he cares. Because he wants control. The house wasn't his to lose. I think he always figured I'd come crawling back when things got hard." "Will he come with law?" "No. Just words. And those don't mean much anymore." He looked her over. She stood firm. Not scared. Just braced. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "And he sure as hell isn't taking you." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward and put her hand on his chest, flat and steady. Her eyes found his. "I need to know you mean that. I would not have said it if I didn't." Her hand lingered. That night, the air was colder than it had been all season. Cade brought an extra wood and kept the fire stacked high. She stayed near it, brushing out her hair again, her dress slipping low at one shoulder, revealing the pale slope of skin beneath. He sat beside her, watched her movements. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked quietly. "Not in years." "You thinking about it now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, yeah. She didn't smile. She just nodded. "I wouldn't expect much," he added. "I'm not after much," she said. "Just someone who stays." The words hung heavy and real. She leaned against him slowly, resting her head on his chest. He wrapped an arm around her, and they sat that way for a long time. Not as strangers, not as broken things surviving in the same space, but as two people who had begun to truly choose one another. Outside, the wind picked up, but the fire held. Inside, so did they. The days shortened quickly that week. Frost clung longer to the ground each morning, and by dusk the winds came colder, sharper. Cade had begun keeping a second fire going during the day in the back room, and Madeline, who once kept to corners of the cabin like a guest, now moved freely, as if the home had settled around her shape. She cooked heartier meals. He taught her how to patch leather. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared, familiar. Even when no words passed for hours, there was no discomfort. The space between them was no longer uncertain. It was theirs, But the visit from the stranger still lingered in the back of Cade's mind. He hadn't said it out loud, but ever since that day, he'd started sleeping with his knife tucked beneath the bed frame again. Not because he expected trouble, but because he knew men like the brother the writer had mentioned. Men who didn't like losing what they thought belonged to them, even if they never wanted it in the first place. Madeline noticed his vigilance. She didn't question it. But one evening, after supper, she stood beside him near the woodpile and asked softly, "You think someone's still coming?" He didn't lie. "Could be. What'll you do if they do?" Kate straightened the stack, set the axe down gently. "Whatever it takes to keep you here." Her lips parted slightly, and she stepped closer, brushing her fingers along the edge of his coat sleeve. "I've lived with men who said that before," she said. "They only meant it when it was convenient." "I mean it," Kate said, "whether it's easy or not." Later that night, inside the warmth of the cabin, Madeline opened a drawer near the hearth she hadn't touched before. Inside was a small tin box, old, dented. She opened it gently. Inside was a single ring, simple silver, dull from time, but still intact. Kate saw her looking. "Was my mother's," he said from across the room. Madeline glanced up, waiting. He stood, crossed to her, and reached for the box. He took the ring in hand and looked at her carefully. "I never gave this to anyone." She didn't speak. "I didn't think I'd need to." Still, she didn't speak. "I ain't got a preacher," he said. "Ain't got a church. Don't even know what day it is today." She stepped forward slowly. "But I've got this house," he continued. "I've got this land. And I've got you." Madeline looked down at the ring, then back up at him. "You a skim me something, Cade?" she whispered. He nodded once. "Yeah, I am." She held out her hand. No tears, no drama. Just that same steadiness she'd carried with her from the barn to the hearth. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a bit loose. She didn't care. "I ain't gonna be perfect," she said. "Me neither. I'll burn bread some days. I'll forget to fix things. I still wake up scared sometimes. I don't always sleep through the night." They stood like that for a long moment. Then she leaned into him, and he wrapped both arms around her, tighter than he ever had before. Her forehead pressed into his collarbone. His hand rested flat between her shoulder blades. That night, they lay in the bed together, not just as man and woman, but as something more, something chosen. Their bodies came together slowly again, bare under the quilts, warmed by skin and breath. But it wasn't just need this time. It wasn't relief. It was clarity. When she whispered his name, when his hands traced her curves, there was no hesitation between them. No fear. Afterward, her head on his chest, she said quietly, "Do you believe in new beginnings?" He breathed in the scent of her hair. "I do now." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing dry leaves across the porch. Inside, the house held. So did they. The wind howled hard that night, knocking against the shutters with a kind of wild persistence. But inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, and the walls held firm. Cade and Madeline lay close beneath the quilt, her head resting just below his collarbone, her hand draped over his ribs. Neither of them had spoken for some time, but there was no tension in the silence, only a quiet sense of knowing. By morning, the wind had died, and a pale frost had covered the yard in white. Cade rose first, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The air stung his lungs, sharp but clean. He took a slow breath, let it out, then turned back toward the house. This place didn't look like much from the outside. It never had, but the roof no longer leaked. The windows were patched, the porch swept, and the barn repaired. The old gate still hung crooked, but now it creaked from use, not neglect. Madeline stepped onto the porch behind him, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders. Her hair was down, messy from sleep. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her bare feet peeked out from beneath the blanket. The silver ring caught a glint of soft light as she held the quilt closed. He turned to her. "I was thinking we should go into town," he said. "Today." She raised an eyebrow. "That's so. We need seed for the spring. Some medicine. Maybe a new blanket." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "And," he hesitated, "and maybe we ought to let folks know. About the ring? About you. About us." There was a beat of quiet. Her breath showed in the cold, drifting past her lips. "You sure?" "Yeah," he said plainly. She stepped forward until they were nearly touching. Then I reckon it's time. They rode in after midday. The mare pulling the wagon Cade had reassembled the week before. It was rough, but it held. Madeline sat beside him, bundled in her coat, gloves too big for her hands. She looked down only once during the ride, at the silver band on her finger, then looked ahead again with her chin lifted. When they reached Bridger Post, folks stared. Cade had expected that. He hadn't come into town with anyone on his arm since before the war. And Madeline, barefoot barn widow, people called her once, walked with quiet purpose now, her shoulders back, her hair neat, her ring visible. The general store went silent when they entered. Cade nodded once at the clerk. Need flour, salt, oil, and seed. We're planting next month. The clerk glanced at Madeline, then back at Cade. That'll run you near $4. Cade didn't blink. Put on my name. As they gathered what they needed, a familiar voice cut through the stillness. Well, I'll be damned, came from near the back. It was Tom Mercer, Cade's cousin on his father's side. Older, loud, a man who never knew when to shut up. He looked Madeline over, smirked. Didn't know you were keeping company these days, Cade. Cade didn't respond. Tom stepped closer, nodding toward Madeline. She the one folks talked about? The one stayed in Branson's barn all summer? Heard she was tough stock. Made herself real at home. Madeline tensed. Cade turned fully toward his cousin. You got something to say it straight, he said, voice low even. Tom held up his hands. Easy now. Just didn't expect you to bring her in like she's yours. She is mine. Tom's grin faltered. Well, all right then. Cade didn't look away until Tom stepped back, muttered something under his breath, and disappeared behind the shelves. Later, as they loaded the wagon, Madeline stood beside Cade without saying much. But her hand found his, and she squeezed it once firm enough. They rode back as the sun dipped low. She sat pressed into his side now, her breath warmer than the wind, her presence anchored. When they reached the cabin again, Cade stopped the wagon near the porch, turned to her, and spoke quietly. You ever want to leave this place, he said, I won't stop you, but I'd sure rather you stayed. Madeline looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were steady. I don't want to leave, she said. Not this house, not this land, not you. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind rose again outside, they sat at the table across from one another. He reached across and took her hand. No preacher, no crowd, he said, but I meant what I asked you, and I mean it still. I do too, she whispered. She stood, came around the table, and sat on his lap, arms wrapped around his shoulders. He kissed her again, slower this time, like it belonged to the land around them, something permanent. In the weeks that followed, the house grew fuller. He built a second bed frame. She added shelves. He carved her name into the inside of the door with his own beneath it. By spring, a second horse stood in the barn. A chicken coop rose near the fence line. The land was still hard, the work constant, but the silence between them never returned. What started with a barn and a woman who had nowhere to go became something solid, unshakable. Not perfect, not easy, but chosen every single day. And when folks passed the gate now, they didn't whisper. They said, that's the Mercer place. And no one dared ask why she stayed.
And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with Where Grit Meets Heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on what's next. See you soon.